This is an Audi RS7 Quattro Sportback. Now I love Audis. I think they're very beautiful cars. I own an Audi myself. I own an Audi TT Roadster. Granted, it is 20 years old. It is still a gorgeous, beautiful car, and I love to hate it. Okay? Now, I'm just going to give you a heads up about Audi ownership. They look all nice. Look how nice and shiny this car is, and it looks awesome. But you know what? This thing is going to depreciate like you wouldn't believe. Like, oh my God, get ready. Because once this car starts hitting like 7 or 8 years old, nobody wants it. Nobody wants to touch it. No one's going to want to work on it. They become nightmares. Audis are just rolling, beautiful nightmares. So I think one of the most satisfying experiences about owning an Audi is, you know what? Just lease it. Don't actually buy it, because leasing, you get to drive it when it's brand new and there's nothing broken and it just works. So enjoy it when it is new, because once these things get old, be prepared for craziness. The weirdest things will break. Things that you don't think should break will just break, and it's one of those mind-boggling things, because for what they ask for one of these cars, what they cost is these astronomical prices. You think this would be the best car in the world. If they're asking this kind of money, the build quality has to be amazing. It's not. It is absolutely the opposite. Once these things start getting old, things start falling apart, like left and right, like things start delaminating and wearing off, and it's just these weird things, and it just, for what this car costs, it should not have these kinds of problems. Okay, for example, my Audi TT. It's a 2002 Audi TT Roadster, not a Quattro, just a standard front-wheel drive, 5-speed with a 1.8 turbo, and before I had it, it was a garage-kept car, very well taken care of. It was in a minor accident when I got it, so I got it really cheap, and I fixed the front end on it. It was just some bumpers and, the headlight and things like that. But mechanically, car was completely taken care of, looked brand new when I fixed it. Everything was fine. And I've owned this car for about maybe over 10 years now. And the things that go wrong with this car is just incredible. Because what's interesting is I also own a 2002 Mini Cooper that I do own since it was brand new. I'm the original owner of that car. Both cars are about the same age. They have about the same mileage, which is about 80,000 miles, which is low for a car that's almost 20 years old. And the Mini, which cost half the price of the Audi TT, has nowhere near the problems that the Audi TT has. It just doesn't make any sense. You think the more expensive car would be the better car, and it's not. The Mini Cooper, which was half the price of this Audi TT, has given me hardly any problems. And this Audi TT, just endless. Now, some of the things that Audi does are things called planned obsolescence. They will deliberately design parts that they know will fail over a course of time. Pretty important parts that shouldn't be designed that way. Like, okay, so my Audi TT in the owner's manual has the interval of when you should change the timing belt. Now, there's a rubber belt that runs the cam and everything, and this car has an interference engine, which means if the belt breaks, the valves go down and the piston hits the valves and destroys the engine. And they miscalculated the lifespan of this timing belt, because the engine is covered in all this plastic and everything to make it look all nice, which actually traps heat inside the engine and makes the engine get hotter, and actually ends up cooking the belt and making the rubber degrade faster than expected. So the belt intervals are much shorter than a normal car, so you always have to change the timing belts. But then also, the water pumps have these plastic impellers. Now, normally a water pump shouldn't have a plastic impeller. It should be a metal impeller that goes around in a circle. It's a high-stress part that shouldn't be plastic, but you know what? They made it in plastic anyway, because hey, it's Audi. So you actually have to go buy an aftermarket pump that has a metal impeller that's better than the one that the Audi designed when you change the timing belts, because the timing belts should be changed quicker than they should be changed. So you had to do that. Then also on top of this, my Audi started leaking antifreeze. So I'm like, what's going on here? Turns out the thermostat housing flange is made of plastic. It shouldn't be made of plastic because that's another part that should not be made of plastic. All right? And so this plastic, again, with the engine getting hot and cold, heats up and warps and distorts, and there's a rubber O-ring that's pressed in, which is completely bonkers. It should be a solid piece of metal with a flat thing with a paper gasket that bolts onto the engine like a normal car, but no. They designed this thermostat housing only to last about 10, 15 years or so, and exactly that's what it is. So I had to change it. I had bought an aftermarket one that's made completely out of metal, and I had to replace that. Another lovely feature are all the anti-theft devices that are in an Audi, because once they get old, they go bad. Sometimes my car doesn't start right away because of the built-in immobilizer. You crank it, it will fire up for 2 seconds and then shut off, and you have to just try again. That's just the way it is. It's just the immobilizer because the car's 20 years old. And on top of all of this, there's a security code that's built into the key, that's built into the gauge cluster, that's built into the ECU of the computer, and all these things have to match, because what happened is my computer died in my car. I don't know why, but the computer decided to fry itself. And not in a way that the car wouldn't run. The car would run completely normal, but there's a little check engine light on that said, check some error. What was that? I don't, what does check some error mean? And I look it up, and you're like, oh, a value in the computer doesn't match the pre-programmed value, and that's all it is, and that's going to put a light on. And well, how do you fix that? Oh, you just need to change the entire friggin' computer. And I'm like, oh, let me go to a junkyard and get a computer from another Audi and plug it in. And oh no, you can't do that because there's a security code that's in the key, that's in the gauge, that's in the computer, and they all have to match, and you can't change that code. And I'm like, why not? And he's like, because Audi is only allowed to change that code. So I'm like, so can I just buy an old computer from a junkyard and bring it to Audi and have it reprogram it? No, you can't do that. You got to go to Audi to get the computer. They won't reprogram computers that you bring to them because it might be stolen or something like that. So then I'm stuck in a situation where I have to take my, at the time, like 16-year-old car to an Audi dealer to get a reconditioned ECU, not a new one, a reconditioned ECU from Audi. And you know how much that cost me? $2,000. $2,000 for another old computer that was that had to be reprogrammed and put it in the car. Like, I could have did that myself. And the kicker is, back in the mid-2000s, if you had a problem with your computer, you could buy a computer, you can go to Audi, and Audi used to give you the code. And then they realized, oh no, we're losing money on this. Stop giving the codes to their users. Even though they can prove that they're the owner of the vehicle, don't give them the security code. So that's what happens. Now, even if you go to the dealer and you ask for the security code, they say, oh, we can't do it because it's encrypted. We plug the computer in and it goes to servers in Germany to reprogram the ECU, and we can't tell you what the code is because we can't see it. It's a bunch of BS, absolute BS. So that ended up costing me $2,000. It's just endless things. 2 years in of owning and driving my Audi TT, the directionals stopped working, the blinkers just stopped. Now in a normal car, there's like a little relay under the dashboard. You pull it out, it's like $3. You plug a new one in, and you're good to go. It just clicks. That's all it's got to do. Not with an Audi. An Audi decide, hey, why wouldn't we put both the relay for the hazard switch and the relay for the turn signals inside the hazard switch? We'll put very tiny relays in the hazard switch that can't really handle the load for the turn signals, but we'll put it in there anyway. And so they put it in the dashboard. Now, that's really annoying, but on top of that, I'm like, oh, well, let me just take out the hazard switch. It's up in the dashboard. Well, you can't get to it. Actually, what you got to do is you got to pull the radio out and then open this little door that's above the radio to get to the hazard switch, but you can't pull the radio out because it has these special holes, and you need a special tool to remove German radios. So I had to order a special tool to pull the radio out, to open this tiny door, to pull a clip out, to fish out the hazard switch through the radio hole, just because my blinkers stopped working. Also, the power windows are very finicky in Audis. They have like some grease in the motors, and as the motors get old, the grease kind of stiffens up, and the computer, the body control module, if it detects any slight resistance in the window, it just stops, and it doesn't go up, it doesn't go down, it just doesn't do anything. And you think it's like, oh, the motor's bad, and you go and you test the motor's fine, and I'm like, all right, what's the problem? Put it back in the car, and by running it manually loosens up the grease, and the window starts working again. So you're like, oh, that's weird. I think maybe it was just a connection. Then it will work for about a year, maybe 2 years, and then all of a sudden it will do it again, and you're like, what the hell? So if you run into this problem, it's the grease inside the motor for the thing. You gotta actually take the cover off the winding of the motor, clean the grease out, and there's like some dust and dirt and grime in there, and put new grease in, and it will work. But like, it was driving me crazy, because it's like one of those things, if it doesn't work in the car, you take it out of the car and it works. And then you test the plug on the car's sending voltage to the motor. What is the deal here? It's because of the body control module figures out there, oh, there's some slight resistance in the window, something is wrong, let me just stop everything. Also, I had a strut, like the spring, the big heavy spring that's in the strut, it cracked. And I mean, I'm not like off-roading this thing, I'm just driving around day to day, and the big thick spring on the passenger side of the strut just cracked, and the piece flew off and like hooked itself onto the spring and was rattling around in there. And I was like, what the hell's going on? And I've never seen that. I've never seen that. How it was just a defect in the steel or something. So I had to like take the strut out, like the whole strut, and like still compress the spring, because it was only like one loop that snapped off, which was like terrifying using a spring compressor, because oh my god, if you ever have to use one of those, it is terrifying, because if that thing like lets go, it will just take your head off. They are scary. So I actually had to do that and then replace one strut spring on the suspension for my Audi TT. I also had the voltage regulator crap out on the alternator and fry my battery like 2 times. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? And there was no check engine codes. Nothing was saying anything was weird. The computer did not detect any type of like over voltage. It would just cook the battery. And I'm like, all right, put another battery in. I think it was defective. Bring it back to the store, get another one, cooks that battery. And I was like, wait a minute. And I checked the volt. It was cooking the battery. And I'm like, all right, well, I need to replace the voltage regulator, because I'm not buying an Audi alternator for like $900. Let me just get the voltage regulator. Buy the voltage regulator. Turns out you can't get the alternator out of the car. The only way, like, without taking the intake manifold off or something like that. So I actually had to like go in there and work in like this tiny little space, unbolt the alternator, and like spin it around inside the engine, unbolt the voltage regulator, and put the new one in, and spin it around and put it back in without taking the alternator out of the car. I had it unbolted, but there's physically no way to get it out of the car without taking the top of the engine off. Like, what? Why? What is this German engineering? Even these headlights are a pain in the ass. Now, granted, my car is almost 20 years old. It still has the HID projection bulbs with the ballasts in them and everything. And so like one of the ballasts was going bad, and I'm like, oh, let me go to Audi. They want like $400 for the ballast for the headlight for this car. And I'm like, this car is 20 years old. I am not spending that kind of money on freaking headlights. All right. So I had to go to the junkyard and find another one and blah, 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 blah. And of course, my car is a little different from another year, and they decided to change midway. So some of the ballasts are bolted to the headlights, some are bolted to the inner fender, and then there's this weird plug. And it's like, just make damn headlights that you can go and put your hand behind it and change the bulb. Why do you need all this crap? So the problems that I currently have with my Audi TT are the roof sensor. So there's a little sensor inside the top of the windshield that when the roof's up, it can detect when it's open or closed. So if you open the handle and pull it back, it lights a little thing on the dashboard saying that the roof is disengaged, and until you fully recline it, and then the light goes out saying, okay, the roof is down. Why does it give a crap if the roof is up or down? I don't know. But it also screws with the power windows, because once that switch goes bad in the windshield, the side windows don't go all the way up or down because it thinks the roof isn't latched, even though it is. So then, if you want to put the windows up or down, you have to shut the car off and then like make sure the roof is clipped, and then manually like just turn the key and put the windows all the way up so it understands that the windows are up and the roof is up at the same time, because if you don't have that and then the sensor's not picking it up, it's not going to put the windows up all the way. Like, why do they bother with this crap? And and another thing, the wind deflector that's behind the two seats, because if it's too windy, you can put this little glass wall up that goes behind the seat, and that uses a very soft rubber belt with these weird shaped teeth on it that just likes to disintegrate and turn into glue. So that is also broken on my Audi TT. So the windshield switch for the roof is broken, the wind deflector is broken, and what else? There's got to be something else. I don't know. But these are my joys of owning an Audi vehicle. Like, it's just a nightmare, an absolute nightmare. But when it's running, it's really fun. It looks gorgeous, and it's really fun to drive when everything is working. But when these things break, and when they will break, it will just kick your ass. Just everything, physically trying to work on it, and financially, and it's just a nightmare. So if you really like Audis, lease one and give it back. Don't try to hold on to it like I am with my freaking 20-year-old Audi TT.